Well, today we're here with Hebru Brantley, contemporary artist and multimedia artist, and I'm Derek Collins here with Phillips, the leading auction house for contemporary art, watches, and design. And we're going to just talk to Hebru about his work and understand what he's doing. And I think that Hebru, there's probably no better way to start with you than to just kind of talk about influences and the people that have inspired you. And I know you've been inspired by very much by the 70s, 80s scene, Basquiat, Warhol, Keith Haring. Tell me about Basquiat. What is it about Basquiat that inspires you?
I think that with an artist like Basquiat, what he represents for, um, young boys, boys of the culture, like young, African Americans and boys of color, is that it's that sort of optimistic view of like, I can do that. It's the arriving at Basquiat to then, be your intro to the rest of the high art and fine art world, as he arrived at Picasso, sort of the same way. Um, I think that, it was, you look at these drawings and these paintings that he's created over his career, which was a short one, and um, they feel childlike, they feel very, very youthful, but underneath that, there's a great deal of complexity. And I think that, naturally, as a novice artist, you kind of arrive at the childlike, uh, you know, sort of feeling and aesthetic, and that brings you in. And so that was kind of it for me. My inspiration or my influences are extremely vast. And, I kind of arrived at Basquiat through a brief understanding of 80s pop art. I was a huge comic book and cartoon kid. And as a way of my mother sort of trying to divert my attention from, the hyper obsessive nature that I have of like diving so deep into those things and the comic book mythologies and all that stuff, she wanted me to explore other avenues of art. And so, at the time I had no real connection with fine art. And Warhol, Herring, guys like that were ways in for me, where I saw the things that they did that didn't really look like the things that I saw when I went to museums. And, seeing Warhol sort of, do his best Roy Lichtenstein impersonation on some, in some instances, and incorporating, iconic pop characters from, Mickey Mouse to Superman. Like, these were the things that I lived for. To further that, seeing Basquiat do the same thing, I was kind of hooked. It was that bad.
Yeah. So you're a young kid, what, maybe 15, 16, and you're kind of immersed in this comic book world, as you say. I mean, what was your parents' reaction or your mom's reaction to this? I mean, what was it like, maybe growing up and you're just budding? I mean, you're just beginning to think about these big ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think for my mother, like we grew up, or I grew up south side of Chicago. What's known now, or it's known then, but sort of rebranded, is Bronzeville. And Bronzeville was an area in Chicago that was, at one point in time, it was like historically black in the most positive and profound way. It was, if you were a black, successful businessman to, athletes, entertainers, political figures, when you came to Chicago at a certain point in time, you stayed in Bronzeville. And like all areas with that sort of history, it goes through, these changes economically. And by the time I was coming up and I lived there, it was sparse, man. It was, wasn't the safest place. My mom kind of tried to put things in front of me to entertain me, to keep me away from, you know, they say idle mind is the devil's playground, right? And so to sort of, hone my focus and my attention and cultivate, this budding artistic talent that she saw her son had, by giving, indulging me with the comics, indulging me with, you know, uh, again, art books and art supplies and things of that nature, whatever she could afford at the time. But she was very, very good about that and engaging me, in my arts and the pursuit of that.
I mean, that's really interesting because, because like I say, you're younger, there's a lot going on. Nobody 15, 16 understands a museum. They don't understand Picasso, modernism, the influence of African art. But there's a way in which you're also looking at the comic book world and you're saying, look, I don't see people like me in this world. I think you've said before that the one thing that stood out to you in this mythology of comics and heroes, superheroes, there were just no black characters, or at least no interesting black characters to speak of. Did that play a role in you beginning to think about, oh, I'd like to change this. I'd like to see a different kind of comic book, a different kind of hero, a different kind of superhero?
I never thought I would be sort of a, the artist to take that on, or to challenge that, sort of norm, as it were. I just, it was always something looming. It was always something felt. But I think as I sort of started to get into my craft more and more, the work you set out doing isn't the work you continue to do, right? You're just finding your voice. And I think for me, just again, to use that comparison of Warhol, right? Warhol started out trying to be like, Roy Lichtenstein, and then he found his platform. And for me, it was the same thing. I was young Basquiat. In my mind, that's who I thought I was. And as time went on, I started to develop my own voice. And you know, being around older artists, from musicians to visual artists, the common thread in a narrative was always sort of being true to one's own voice, and like creating who you are, or presenting who you are within your creations. It took years of development to sort of get there and find that voice. And especially in a place like Chicago, where, within the fine art world, the themes and the things that I was creating weren't something that were commonplace in the realm of fine art. Again, it was all these different things, but that lane, that language wasn't present, at the time. And I think that, it obviously it's grown, but it just wasn't there when I first started.
And I know you were influenced by sort of in the 60s and 70s this celebration of black art, performance, music, the AfroCOBRA movement. But what led you? This takes me back a little bit to Basquiat. What led you to kind of street art? What led you to get out there and start, doing murals and hitting trains and all this stuff?
Well, it was a combination. It was a lot of the guys from the Afro-Cobra movement. It was Basquiat. It was, the early phases and stages of, hip hop culture, graffiti culture. It was sexy. It was appealing to a young person because, at the time, when you're so young, you don't, your voice is so small in this big world. And within that subculture, you're able to communicate, your language and your voice to your peers, and through the city. And it's almost like campaigning, if you're running for public office. And it's no different with, traditional graffiti culture, right? Tagging your name on the walls and so forth. And I think that was really appealing. But I arrived at all of that because of the Afro-Cobra movement. When you travel the south side of Chicago, a lot of those murals, are still, alive and well. They're very well respected in that community. And it's weird because, that's a community that's gone through its ups and downs, its, trials and tribulations. And for that art to remain a constant, almost a landmark, is a testament to, you know, again, those artists and what they were able to do. And so a lot of that sort of drew me into graffiti culture.
So you don't actually start out. I mean, you're doing the graffiti and you're doing all this other stuff, but actually your formal training then is more in film and in
Mhm.
doing storyboarding. Talk a little bit about that because that's a big shift, right?
Well, film was always, I think the first real love because, it was, I struggled with attention issues, and did as a kid. And, I don't think that it was recognized when I was younger, um, as it is now. But film, for whatever reason, those stories, those narratives held my attention. And, I had aspirations to be a storyteller. I didn't really understand, which medium that was going to be. And naturally, I thought it was film. And then as I went to school and pursued that, you know, through, undergrad, gaining some experience and enough to understand of what it takes to really pull off a production, from finances to resources and, crew, etc. And, you know, all of that time that I was doing that, I was still, again, I was doing storyboard, I was working in art departments, and, it all came back to art. It all came back to the creation. And this idea that, all of these projects don't happen if you don't have the art attached to them in some way, shape, or form. And so it was the thing that I could do myself. It was the thing that I didn't need permission for. It was the thing that I didn't need a crew for. It was a solo act. And so I kind of, diverted a bit from the pursuit of filmmaking back to the thing that I had, sort of started with, which was my own artistic practice.
So then the film and the storyboarding. I mean, is it around then that you begin to come up with characters? Flyboy, Little Mama. These are your iconic characters. What's interesting is there's also a kind of historical set of references going on there too, right? So when do you kind of get interested in sort of, I mean, I guess African American history and start thinking about that? Because Flyboy seems to come out of a real interest in the Tuskegee Airmen in particular. So how do
Mhm.
those things come together?
I mean, there's the really fast Cliff Notes version, but I think that it came out of sort of an understanding at a certain point of history, right? More importantly, of Black history, the Black body, and then also the portrayal of the Black body within, different mediums. And I think that I got really attracted to for the satirical imagery of blacks in animation, in film, as collectibles.
Collectibles, yeah. So all of that,
Yes.
yeah, that's all. That's blackface, all that stuff.
As I got older and grew to understand what that was, I also, I felt like within that level of appropriation, there's a power in which those images held, and a place in which they hold true into to me and my upbringing, but to further explore those notions. And so that's kind of where it started, right? It was like looking at the canon of animation since the dawn of, uh, that medium, and how they treated and talked about, African Americans and the Black body, and wanting to, you know, do certain things and associate or sort of reappropriate these images to say and do what I needed to say. But I've always been attracted to characters, because without characters, you can't push your narrative through. I feel like or it's maybe a little less effective, at least for me. I felt that, you know, some of the greatest narratives had some of the greatest characters, and it became, just the iconography. And so for me, as I was even coming up through, graffiti culture, I was never really attracted to sort of the traditional styles of wild style and the lettering. I was more attracted to the characters, because I felt like, though this word can be presented in many forms, this character, depending upon how it's rendered, can say so much more. You look at, Peanuts, Family Circus, now Boondocks, right? You have these iconic characters that this artist, this creator, can use as a vessel to say anything he wants to say. If it's personal, something personal going on with them, they are the vessel in which to relay that message. If it's political, if it's all these things. So I just saw power in all of that, and wanted to explore, that history, and bring something forth that felt a little new, and felt uniquely Black. Honestly, I didn't really see anything in the space that attempted to do that, and it was just kind of creating something from the context of cartoons, but completely blowing it up outside of its context that was originally created for, right? Putting it on gallery walls and museums in a way that, you can really redirect and change the narrative in which it was initially intended.
Yeah, and it sort of has blown up now into kind of its own universe. I mean, like you say, not only has it permeated the art world, but the commercial world. Lots of other things are sort of out there. Your vision, I think, is kind of all encompassing. So when you look at one of your characters, or when you look at an installation like the Watch, for example, or when you look at Flyboy, that you instantly feel engaged in whatever it is they're doing. And in a way, what you said is there's a kind of embedded narrative. Now, for somebody that maybe doesn't know your work as well, I think they're still going to connect with that immediately. But how should they read the narrative? Is it kind of, is it closed? I mean, you're looking for people to get a certain feeling or get a certain idea from your work, or is it more about just, just kind of going along for the ride wherever that goes? I mean, kind of just feeling a certain level of empathy with the characters, but maybe not always understanding what's going on, or you add your own ideas about what's happening in the image, in the picture.
I think this is sort of where I lean into my understanding of motion picture, right? Where you can create these narratives, you can create this film, as it were, this piece, and you present it, and then you allow the emotion, the conversation to happen outside or after the viewing or during the viewing of what that intention is, right? What was the director really trying to say here? What was the artist really trying to say here? And for me, it's, it's extremely cathartic to be able to create these little, brown children and pose them in certain ways in which I can make a statement that sometimes might just be extremely personal, and yet it's perceived a completely different way by someone else. I think the thing that I don't want, and the thing that has been, honestly, like, hard, or was hard in the offset, was I didn't want people to devalue the creation because it was coming from a certain context, coming from, this sort of more animated anime cartoon space, and to lessen the value of the intention because of the aesthetics, you know, and that's always something that's, that's a conversation that never dies. But I think as I sort of continue on and continue to work within different mediums and, do more, I think that, it's allowing to see the full breadth of what I'm in, what I'm focused on and what I want to say. I think that, it's becoming a little bit clearer to more folks that, this is something that is not just art for art's sake, or this has some real meaning. This has some depth to it.
Everybody wants art to be meaningful, and I can totally see your point. Is it art that should lead to social change, or is it art that should just create a deeper understanding of the African American experience, the Black experience? Is the art there to move people to do something?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think it's a per piece, it's like a by per piece basis. You look at an artist like Marvin Gaye. You know, Marvin Gaye has penned some of the best love songs of all time. He's also penned some of the most politically charged, thoughtful work of all time. And I think that it really, I mean, I wasn't alive when he created those works, but I think that you have to allow for the artist to sort of grow, and for that conversation to constantly evolve. And you know, for me, I think that there are times where the engagement is different. There are times where it is more personal. There are times where it is sort of socially. Uh, I am a little bit more socially aware of the things that I'm saying, and want to evoke a certain emotion from the people at large. I think, especially with what has transpired over the past couple of years, in the States, um, I have made sort of a conscious decision not to necessarily hold back in the way that I have in the past. I think that, when you talk about, seeing the work as, oftentimes not just, being about one race or one side of the coin. I think that that is sometimes intentional. I think that we as human beings, we go through a gamut of emotion. We all experience similar things, but I think there are commonalities within us all, and I you know love that I'm able to at times connect to those commonalities. Again, to bring it back to Marvin, love is a common narrative in any culture. And you know and I think that in the way that music is successful in bridging and knocking down barriers, for me it's that's not necessarily the intent. The intent is to just give you me. These are my creations, this is my voice. But you know in certain moments, I want that voice to scream a little louder, and I want it to be very direct in terms of what it's saying.
Right, and one of the other things that comes through in your work is a kind of radiating confidence, I think, in the part of your characters. I mean, there's an astonishing amount of historical depth in some of your pieces, and the one I'm thinking of in particular has to do with your series, the Tignon Law,
Mhm.
which I think is really interesting. If you don't know, if people don't know what this is, you have to dig a little bit. But going all the way back to the 18th century in New Orleans and the way Creole women were, were forced, black women in particular, but also Creole women were forced to kind of dress down and not have so much going on with their visual presentation, their self presentation, because of the threat that might be to both to white women and to white men. So in this piece, darker than the colors of my lover's hair, you've got references to Picasso in this piece and modernism and his Demoiselle d'Avignon, and also to quilting and weaving in the African American tradition, and into comics, of course, and to your
Mhm.
and even statements in the comics about about uh, just friends helping friends and the need to kind of be
Mhm.
supportive of one another. And so, what I find really interesting is that is a very, very loud statement in a piece that is otherwise, if you don't have any idea what's going on, is just beautiful. It's truly a piece about Black heritage, but it's actually a piece about Western heritage. It's a piece
Mhm.
about, I mean, in a way, I guess about how you grapple with these complex, social, political, racial circumstances.
I'm 6'8". I'm black. I'm from the south side of Chicago. I'm not a professional athlete. I am a creative and a storyteller. When I get on a plane and I sit in first class next to, a white woman, and I'm drawing the entire flight, and she asks me what team do I play for, right? Like that's, you know, that's a part of that conversation with Ting Yong, because Ting Yong was about identifying people of color, right? Calling them out. It's almost a scarlet letter. And so to show that there is shades of black complexity to, you know, all of us. We're not just one brushstroke. We're not just, I forget the term, but we're not just one thing. There's depth to us. There's complexity. And so, for someone like myself, growing up where I grew up, and my family history, my culture, like being hyper aware of all of that, but then wanting to, create sort of a counterculture myself within my artwork and speak to not only, the past and give value to, the struggle, the ancestors, and all those that came before, but then also talk about those that are here right now that are underrepresented in their subcultures and the things that they love and appreciate.
So let's talk about right now, because right now is a really interesting time globally. And I'm actually thinking about both Asia and the US. And I'm thinking about the experiences, the long experience African Americans and Blacks have had, both in the US and elsewhere, but also quite recently the experience that Asian immigrants and Asian Americans have had in the US. We're just at an inflection point where people are tired of being mistreated. The mistreatment is just gone a bit too far. And although maybe your work when you intended to do certain pieces weren't, you couldn't have anticipated the future, but in a
Sure.
strange way, it's incredibly timely.
Yeah, I think again that's not always the intention, but listen, man, we've come from I didn't grow up where you grew up, but I'm sure we have shared experience, shared life experience at some point, right? There's connective tissue.
But I've had questions about which team I play for.
Exactly. So, I think, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a deeper well to sort of go into, but I think that, by and large, shit rises up, man, and we're at the point right now, excuse my French, where shit has sort of bubbled to the top, and we're tired of the acceptance of what has become sort of the norm, and I can really appreciate this point in history, and living through it, and also being able to be sort of a griot in that way of like being here to document some of that through the work. It's
It's a reference to West African storytelling. What you just said
mhm,
there, and I think that that is your role as the storyteller. They were storytellers, and they were keepers of memory and nostalgia. And I want
mhm,
to talk a little bit about some of this in a broader sense too, because in addition to the sort of power and the social situation of your work, your work has a strong appeal to nostalgia and memory. Do you see your work one
mhm.
day, people looking back at your work one day and saying, yeah, he was very much of the moment. He was very much, starts in the 90s. You can see his work already, in the early 2000s, and it's marked by that period in history? Or do you see something bigger, more universal and longer lasting in that?
Whew. I would hope to see something bigger. I obviously, to be to be seen at all is something is great. But um, I think there you go. Um, but I think I want it to be bigger. I think my greatest work has yet to be created. And as I continue to sort of push and push, and evolve, I think that you know. The attempt or the goal is to find my place within this great conversation of art, and it's a sort of a bigger breath, I think, or that's the hope.
I mean, you've got some of the highest profile collectors, and not just in the African American community, but interestingly enough, you've got some high profile collectors within that community. I mean, but between the Pritzkers in Chicago and Jay Z and Beyonce, and so I want to talk a little bit about the collectors, Swizz Beats and Chance the Rapper. You've got a really interesting. I mean, it's basically black royalty. I mean, I would say is collecting your work, right? And I find this really extraordinary because collecting art, although there are many black collectors, it's not something they were doing 150 years ago or 100 years ago, or
Sure.
maybe not even 50 years ago to the same extent that they are now. And I want you to speak to this because I think it's important that people understand the relationship you're creating with collectors, and especially new collectors. And in fact, you've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's highly collectible. And you've got political figures and movie directors and like I say, athletes, major athletes
Mhm.
who've collected your work. So say something a little bit about this community, your engagement with them, or how you see that engagement, their engagement with your work.
Well, I think it's one of the paths that I took early was to sort of do everything myself. You know, I was a little disenchanted with the gallery system early on. I think as a younger artist, I didn't go. A lot of the things that I do are extremely like non-conventional. I didn't, go to grad school. I didn't do, studio studies for painting, etc. And so with that, I always kind of felt early on that the best spokesperson for the work would be myself. And if I could teach people how to look at the work, you know, that would help. Growing up in Chicago, they have, a group of collectors that, the diaspora arts, and some really prominent collectors in that community that I was privy to, kind of in my teenage years to early college years of sitting in conversation, just being the fly on the wall and listening to their viewpoints on art, on collecting. And the thing that struck me the hardest was like, a lot of these people didn't come from, strong economic means. They were folks that worked a regular 9 to 5 and didn't really make a lot of money, but had some of the most amazing art collections and the way they approached it. And first starting off buying things that they liked, things that responded to them and hit them in that sweet spot. And so that was always sort of my pitch with other collectors and how I engage them. And I think that you know um, it's a very strange thing of how I ended up on this path, but it came from a sense of hustle. Again, a kid from the south side of Chicago, like I didn't know any other way. If I'm speaking for myself and speaking to the work, it's like then I have to really be pretty knowledgeable about what I'm saying. And so I think it started there, and there was a sense of earnest with that, and I think that people connected to that, and it was that effect of like, well, I met this person over here. He's high profile. He has friends. They connected with the work because again, there's a commonality. There's the shared sort of story within the work that they identified with, and they wanted to meet me, and so forth and so on. But you know, it was always it really wasn't ever about the profile of the collector. It was just really about the collector and the person that appreciated the work enough to want to live with the work. I didn't care about the economics of the person, more about the character of the collector. And that's sort of where it started, I think, for me, and obviously has grown. But it's afforded me to meet some of the most amazing human beings and people that I grew up looking up to and idolizing.
Yeah, I mean, and now they're maybe getting out of the shower and stepping on your bath mat, and they're looking at a piece, and maybe they're lighting up an ultra lumen, and they've got a piece on the wall.
Right.
I don't know. I love it, right? I mean, and I love
Yeah.
so where does this go for you in a way? I mean, what I mean is in particular like this the way in which you've expanded your work, you've moved into lots of commercial products and other things. You've done lots of deals with merchandisers and with some major athletics wear companies. Bombay Sapphire, Nike, Adidas. I mean, the list goes on. So, what's your view of how this grows or how this develops?
Well, I'll step back for a second and just say that the art world comes with its own set of unwritten rules, and um, you know it takes defiant ones to sort of break those rules and change what those unwritten rules are and make them acceptable. I've had so many collectors, so many gallerists, curators, etc., sort of kind of stick their nose up at that approach, because it doesn't follow a certain set of guidelines or rules that have been, set forth. But I just feel like, rules are meant to be broken, things are always meant to change and evolve. And so for me, you know, listen, I'm a creator at the end of the day. Like Lennon said, give me a tuba, I'll get you something out of it. Like whatever that medium is, whatever that thing is, I have uh, an instinct to want to create, to want to make things. And so that shouldn't limit, you know, those that can participate in that level of creation. And for me, again, I look at some of the masters. I look at Warhol. Warhol was the godfather of pop. He was the godfather of editions and things of that nature. Yet
And broke all the rules.
broke all the rules, but yet and still didn't, still only engaged at a certain level. You know, it wasn't until he passed when people started licensing his images to put on, you know, you know, doormats or cup holders or whatever. And for me, it's like, no, I want the flowers while I'm still alive to smell them. I want to be able to engage with all audiences, because that, to me, that's a mark of success, when you can reach over beyond one space into a completely different one and still be respected and known. And why limit it to the art world and these collectors, these people that effectively are buying cool. I'm not, tearing down one to raise up the other, but it's just the thing of I want to, people that like and appreciate the things that I do, I want them to be able to participate in those things. And so, again, going back to Warhol, he never did that. He wasn't able to do that. And right now we live in a time where absolutely I can, it's an email away to a manufacturer and I have this idea and we can make it happen. And so, for me, that's important because that's how I reach these different generations. For me to have a 60-year-old, Jewish couple that only collects, I don't know, just say Picasso work, right? To come to a show that I've done and tell me how much they appreciate the work and also collect the work. Now they've added my work to their collection. And then to have a 6-year-old girl from the west side of Chicago have her parents bring her to a show and have that same level of admiration, but just maybe not the same level of understanding, but connects with the aesthetics in some way that's meaningful. That's almost better than than the people that are buying the work at X amount. So it's I don't ever want to limit myself, or have others limit me by a set of rules or mandates of things you can't or aren't supposed to do. I don't really believe in that.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad to hear you say that because I mean, here I am sitting in Hong Kong, and we're at in a time when Asia is just exploding. The art world is exploding, but more importantly, boundaries are being redrawn. I mean, it's really timely that you're talking about this, and I'm sitting here and we're sharing this with our audiences around the world, but particularly here in Asia, because I think there is an acceptance here of commercial artists. I mean, if you look at KAWS, if you look at Murakami, some of the folks that I know you're also keenly watching, they're hugely accepted over here in Asia, as are old masters and contemporary Chinese art and pre-modern Chinese art. It's sort of everything kind of goes right now, and in a way, your art I think would speak not just to the types of people that you've talked about, but I think you could sort of map that onto communities here that would really kind of accept. I mean, from the young kid that maybe didn't even grow up with a museum because there haven't been museums in Hong Kong, but there are now, and so they're going to see
Right.
your work on the wall for the first time. To the very experienced collector that, as you mentioned, like your Chicago collectors, just they see value in it and they want to collect it because it's a great piece and they know it'll hold value. But I really think as things are being rewritten over here, it's really timely for an artist like you, I think, to be presented to this part of the world.
I can't say I disagree with you. I think so as well, and that's I think that the amount of attention and the amount of appreciation that I've received thus far from that side of the world has been great, and again I think that because it's a little bit more, those lines aren't drawn, as rigid or as tight as they are in the States in certain ways. I think that it affords me a great opportunity to, continue and pushing the work and outside of just, the United States. So I'm really, really thankful for that, for everything that's going on right now.
Yeah. So I know you also have some other projects. I mean, you have film projects. What are some of the things you're working on, maybe in the next few years, that people should know about?
There's always things happening. I think the most immediate thing is I'm doing it's a unique project with Netflix right now, where they sort of identified a few auteurs, and I was one of the ones selected, and so I wrote this story, and we're doing these series of short films, and the short films will kind of serve as proof of concept for a feature film, but it's the opportunity to play in a space that I've wanted to play in for a while, and having Netflix, which is a huge studio now, and the Netflix budget, as opposed to playing with the regular indie film, short film budget, allows me to, just to sort of further that voice. Those influences span beyond just the walls of galleries and museums into, the George Lucases of the world, the Steven Spielbergs. I grew up Amblin kid. Everything that they did, I devoured. And so um, I'm doing this first project. It's called Erax, and it's effectively, it's kind of doing what I've done in the fine art space, where, a lot of these stories I've never seen myself in, or people that look like me. So I jokingly say that Erax is a it's a family story, but it's gremlins with black folks, so to speak. So something fun, something that my kids hopefully won't get too afraid of, but just engaging on that level and creating something hopefully masterful in the vein of the Amblins and the Spielbergs, Ron Howards, and Lucases of the world.
What are your kids like? Are there particular pieces or characters that your kids like?
So it's funny, Flyboy kind of arrived shortly after I had my son. My son is now, he's 18. He's about to head to college. Um, a young budding creative as well. He's going to school for fine art, for graphic arts. Um, so but I think it's just like living with that every day, where it's less impressive. My daughter, on the other hand, she's 6 now, and she is, you can't tell her she's not Lil Mama.
Right, right.
She is the character.
Fantastic. I love
If
that. Wow.
yes, if I make a painting or a statue, oh, that's me, huh, Daddy? It's automatic assumption that that's her.
And you have to agree,
Um,
right? I mean, you just have to say
oh, of
yes.
course, you can't say no. Yeah, I want a peaceful household.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, it's really, I think living through them, and obviously, your kids keep you young, but I think, being able to share what I've created with them is just as meaningful as the creation, and just how they, at times participate in the thought. The funniest thing, I told the story the other day, but my daughter, we call her the boss because she's been here before. She's only 6, but she's been here before. But I was working on a new piece, and she kind of caught me staring at it, and she asked me, she said, what are you looking at? And I said, well, I'm trying to figure out this last thing. I said, and she said, no, it doesn't need anything. I think you're done. And she just tapped me on the shoulder, and she just walked off. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm done. The boss has spoken. Uh, the boss has spoken. But yeah, I always wanted to grow up in a household that, had art, and you know, just that feeling of that creative energy. And I didn't, I was the creative force in my household growing up. And so to be that for them, and, help inspire them, as they grow and figure out what they want to do, I think it's everything for me.
Yeah, and you've created that too now for them, right? Because I know you collect. I mean, who are some of the artists you
Hmm.
collect now? I mean, I know you have your own work. You have to have some of your own work
Sure.
out. But who are some of the artists that you collect, and why do you collect them? You're inspired by them, I guess, or you admire what they do.
Yeah, I think, it comes back to that thing of like, when something hits you, and my collection is all over the place, from Asian American artists to, Asian born artists, um, you know, to African American artists. I mean, going back to, some from Romare Bearden to Derek Adams now to Nina Chanel, which are, you know, uh, friends. I'm still waiting for my Bisa Butler piece. Um, but I think, again, like, with great respect and admiration, for guys like Takashi Murakami, who blazed the trail. I have very few of my own works in my house, because I live with it every day. I don't need to see it. Though my wife has her favorites, and we have those as well. But a great deal of artists, like, a lot of some Chicago greats, some new, some old. but always, I have that collecting bug. I kind of grew up with it. It started with comics and basketball cards, and now it's evolved to, you know, many $1,000 in fine art. You know, it's just what.
Fantastic.
Um,
But I got to ask you just two more questions before we
sure.
go. So one's about the future. One is just about, so I know you identify partly with sort of Afrofuturism and this idea about the African diaspora and technology in particular. But what I really want to ask about is the future, because the art world is of course changing so dynamically. So what about NFTs? What about non-fungible tokens? You've probably been asked this before. Do you see a place for that in your work at some point coming up?
I think I would be foolish not to, you know, to even just to explore, what that is or what that could be. I think, it's definitely interesting. I mean, for something to seemingly, for me at least, seemingly sort of come out of nowhere. Um, but it also kind of, when you think about it, it arrives from a bit of, nerd culture in a way. You look at like Pokemon cards and, those NFTs and the things associated with video games. And so, it's I think it's been around, but now this deep exploration within the fine arts world. I don't know. It's very intriguing, and I think that it's something. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it'll evolve into its own thing, and really start to have once it sort of settles down. Right now, it's a lot of the hype, but I think that naturally it will evolve, and I think as we've seen, the art world will sort of learn how to monetize off of it and how to cultivate it, even further. But yeah, I mean, we're actually working on my first one now to kind of just test the waters.
Yeah, no, 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 because there's some big players over here on this side of the world too that are interested in this, and it does
Hmm.
seem to open up opportunities for artists in ways that we haven't quite anticipated, right? But that's part
Sure,
of the reason for the interest. All right, one final
sure.
question. I got to ask you one last question before I let you go. This has been fantastic, by the way. But if Jean-Michel Basquiat walked into the room right now, what do you think he would say about you and what you've been doing?
Oh my God. Um, that's a really, that question caught me off guard. I don't know. I will say this, and this may come across corny or fake or whatever, but when I was in my late 20s and really questioning my path and everything, and I've always had trouble sleeping, and I would have these sort of fever dreams, and for months on end I would have this almost like this reoccurring dream. I would be in New York. I, I idolize and fantasize about New York in the 80s because it just seemed like this glamorous time, even though there was hardships and New York was the Wild West. But I'd be on the train in this car, in this empty car with Jean-Michel, and he would never talk to me, and I was always fearful to talk to him. And one night, this was the last time I had the dream. The last time I had the dream, we got off the car at the same stop. And so we walk down the steps, I'm right behind him. And as we get down, he turns around to me and he looks at me. And I'm thinking, oh shit, he's pissed or something. I'm following. And he's like, no, keep going. You're doing all right. And that was it. And that was enough to be like, okay, I am. And it's so weird because again, this is all in here, but that's what really helped course correct and continue and put me on my path to go forward. So I don't know what he would really say, but in my head, in my dream, he told me to keep going. So I'm gonna keep going.
Well, Mr. Hebru Brantley, this has been a sincere pleasure. Thank you for taking the time today to talk with me. I really appreciate it. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, man. These are great, great questions, and I had a lot of fun. So this is awesome.
Fantastic. All right, take care. Okay, and I hope to see
You
you
as
over
well,
in Hong
man.
Kong soon, man. I hope to see you
Yes.
over here again.
Yes. As soon as we're allowed to come outside again, I'm there.
All right, fantastic, fantastic.